Hey, everybody, welcome back to The Truth About Death and Dying. I am Sheila, your host, and it is my great pleasure to introduce one of my best friends, Alicia McPhail. Hi, Alicia.
Hi,
I'm,
everybody. Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy you're here. Of course, it's always sad because the reason you're here is because you have a death that we're going to discuss today.
Yeah,
So I think the best way to start is to just kind of, if you would just give us a little, I know your background, but the
right.
viewers don't. So if
Sure.
you could just give us a little background on the dynamics of your family
Sure.
and just kind of, we'll start there.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm actually glad that you reached out and asked me to do this because I feel like well, it was my mom that passed and in our situation, I am an only child. I don't she her siblings we came from she came from a very small family as well, so there wasn't a lot of closure at the end of her death. There wasn't a lot of follow up mourning. There wasn't discussion. There wasn't even a funeral. There wasn't a celebration of life. So, this is actually kind of bringing it full circle for me to be able to just have somebody to talk to about this. So, even though it's been since 2017 when she passed, I think this is going to be really kind of therapeutic and healing for me, much like a funeral is or a celebration of life. So, that being said, I am an only child of Jeri Andrews Corson, which was her married name, and Gilbert Coffin. Those were my parents. My mom had me, I think, right when she was 18, right out of high school. She married my dad. Had a great life for a while. Then they got divorced when I was in third grade. Um, and my mom and I moved from what I would consider to have been a really cushiony um, life. They were members of the tennis club. We lived on Oil Road, big house, had the dog, to kind of a rundown apartment down behind Raina's, actually, or the poorhouse.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really never discussed with me as to what caused it, or why that happened, other than I just, I heard rumors and whatnot, but that wasn't ever discussed. And it was really hard on me. But my mom at that point, getting married right out of high school to now living on her own in a really rough environment. I think she was a cocktail waitress at night. She decided to put herself through school during the day and work part time. My grandparents helped her a lot, helped me a lot. Um, I saw my dad every other weekend. Um, but my mom struggled a lot with her inability to maintain the lifestyle that she had, which is when I really started noticing some changes in her behavior as far as, drinking. She became obsessed with aerobics classes. I remember at least 3 times a week we were running all over town to go to different recs, and the Ys and different auditoriums for aerobics classes. And then she'd go to work at night until 1 or 2 in the morning. And I was on my own at night for a really long time. So, needless to say, when the weekends came, I was always so excited to go to my father's, because my dad didn't struggle. Um, Life didn't change. My mom started drinking a lot, not eating. She was a very tiny girl anyway. My mom is the total opposite of me. So she was probably 90 pounds, 5'2" maybe, but very fixated on weight, not eating. There's a lot of, well, back in the 80s, 70s, and 80s anyway, a lot of smoking, a lot of wine, and a lot of tab drinking. Tab, she like lived on tab.
I
Uh,
remember Tab.
yeah,
Tab was
and
horrible.
and tab was horrible, but she loved it. And more cigarettes, the long cigarettes, more. And like a classic. What the only thing I ever remember really my mom eating were cheese and crackers. So a few pieces of cheese and some crackers. So you add that all up, a couple glasses of wine, and the evenings weren't real fun. And so weekends with my dad were the complete opposite. It was out to eat Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Um, we had the money to do things. Come Sunday, when I got dropped back off at my mother's, there was a lot of resentment of the things that I was able to do. And I get all of that now, but it did create kind of a hardship. So that being said, that happened. That kind of is a lot of what I remember about my younger years with my mom. Fast forward, she did graduate college on her own, which she was very proud of, going back to school as an adult. And she worked for the Bangor Housing Authority, which she was very proud of. And she met a man who she married and moved out to Dedham, Maine. And in between there too, she did have quite a few boyfriends. Um, there were a lot of people I got to know, which is kind of how I got my my love for singing, because she worked at the flight deck lounge. Funny story, at the airport, it used to be called the flight deck lounge, on
I
top
remember
of,
that. I
yeah, yeah.
remember that. Yeah.
So there were a lot of young, nice looking, they had live entertainment. So there was, met a lot, I met some guys that I would go to work with my mom some nights and sit at the bar and wait for mom to get out of work. But then the people that sang or whatever would sing with me, teach me things, teach me piano, let me sing on stage in a bar, late at night as a child, but I loved it. So that being said, she finally remarried a man who was comfortable, and her life completely changed. So there was no more suffering, and she kind of did a 180, and she had the best of everything. And when the latest and greatest came out, she had it, whether the first one was still workable or not. She like completely, she indulged and loved it. The drinking maintained, the addiction to aerobics and working out and the treadmill maintained, the not the watching what she ate maintained, but she didn't suffer as much, and the anger kind of minimized. So I don't even know really from there. They moved down south. That didn't work out. We moved back here. Uh, she got divorced. Moved back to Maine. I can remember there were some incidences when she first moved back here to Maine. When I moved back as well, so she must have been in her 40s, and um, I noticed some things with her, but things like she'd call me in a panic and couldn't figure out how to work the remote control
And
on.
I just want to stop just real quick because I don't think that we
Yeah.
even mentioned,
Oh, we didn't.
we didn't
What
mention
she
what your
got.
mom was diagnosed with.
So frontal lobe
Frontal
dementia.
lobe, yeah,
It's
dementia. Yeah.
lobe,
Okay.
yeah, dementia,
Okay.
early onset.
Early onset dementia.
Hmm.
Because your mom was like, what, 64, 65 when she died?
When she died, yeah,
Yeah.
and I can't even tell you when the official diagnosis was, which we can get into later, because that was all kept from me. Yeah, that was kept, between her and her husband. So I don't really know the exact year, or how long they knew that was the diagnosis, because there
Hmm.
were always,
Right.
excuses made, and they were, yeah. Um, but that is when she passed. But looking back now, of course, you try to say, well, was that the dementia starting when she would call me and say, I can't figure out how to program my shows, you on the VCR.
Hmm.
And I'd be like, Mom, I just showed you that 2 days ago, or I wrote it down. Well, I can't find the paper. And I can remember, like, because I had my own things going on in my life, as far as
Right.
being busy, or I was raising children, or I was a single mom of three. And here she would call me, I felt like 2 or 3 times a week asking me the same question. And so my patience would I'd get snappy,
Yeah.
because I felt like, who's the parent here? Like,
Yeah.
write it down if you can't remember. Do you
Right.
not? I have more important things to do. And
Right.
again, I don't know. She was always a little ditzy anyway. But when you take, and this is part of the dementia as well, which, her neurologist told me this, that something about the alcoholism does play a part in dementia. It impacts the number of clusters that are in a woman's brain. So, you know, there's that too. So, I mean, I don't know if the alcoholism increased the symptoms, or if and she'd be perfectly sober when she would ask me 3 times a week, how do I, switch from VCR to whatever it is I need, CDs. But
Yeah.
I was that person, when she was single, because
Hmm.
she was in between husbands. She had 3 of them.
Right.
I was that person, and I resented that because I was the child, or the
Hmm.
the daughter, or whatever stage it was. I shouldn't have had to have been that person. I had
Right.
my own struggles that I felt like I couldn't go to somebody for, and so I can remember that starting in her 40s. So that's where that kind of, I vividly remember just being pissed
Yeah.
that she couldn't remember those kind of things.
In hindsight, like now that you know, or when you got the diagnosis, like
Mhm.
like how many years, how far did it go back, do you think, before when you were like, oh, that was probably the dementia and not the alcohol?
And that's the thing, is that I don't know. I don't know. The
Which was,
things
yeah, you
like,
couldn't
I don't
differentiate.
know. Now, she
Okay.
would never call me intoxicated and ask those things, because she didn't care. Like, she was
Right.
intoxicated. She was a very different person. She was mean. She wasn't asking me nicely. When she was intoxicated, she was a different person, and she wasn't trying to program her shows.
Right.
You know, um, I just thought, geez, are you that dingy? I just thought she was ditzy, to be honest with you, like a ditzy blonde, for a
Yeah.
long time. But uh, it's when the stories started happening, Sheila. The stories started happening when she married Sheldon Corson. So I moved back home in. Remember when Chloe? You helped me. You moved
I
me
did
home.
help. I moved. I drove back with you
You drove back with me.
from North Carolina. Yeah.
Yes. So it was in. That was the year I moved back to Maine.
I think it was like
2000,
two,
2001.
2000, I think. Yeah, I think it was 2000.
My mom moved home a year later, 2001, 2002. She lived in a very rundown, rat infested apartment that a well-to-do person in Bangor was a slumlord. I won't say any names, on Garland Street. That was a very trying time. I mean, I was called on Christmas to come remove rats. Again, she was single, and I always thought, gosh, you can't do anything without a man. That's how I felt. Like, you are helpless without a man in your life, and,
and if
and
and then she would call upon you.
always, I was it. I was the
So
only.
you were
Yeah.
her man. You were
Yes.
the one that came, not the man, but
Yeah.
she always had to have someone take care of her. It sounds like.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'd get there, and and whether there were rats or mice or whatever, I don't know. I never saw any, but I was the frantic, you know. Can you come over here? There's mice, and it's Christmas, and I've got 3 kids, or at that point 2 kids that I'm trying to do Christmas with, but it's an emergency, and you can't leave your mother alone on Christmas, and I can't have her over because I'm with the other side of the family. So, it just, there was a lot of that built up. And now, do I think that was part of it? I do, because she would say that she could hear the scratching, and that was right around the time she met her third husband, who they say 3 times is the charm, and he was the person that she was meant to die with. Absolutely, he was her angel. He was her caretaker. There was no one else that she was meant to be with through this disease than Sheldon Corson, who has also passed. But he also was a big enabler. He loved her almost too much. Uh, and so when he would do whatever that woman said, he would hide if she didn't want things talked about. He just idolized my mother. And so when they got married, they moved to another big, beautiful house on the ocean that they had built. Um, he was pretty high up in laying construction. And so he sold the cabin that he had, and they built a custom house down in Stockton Springs. And things got really bad then, as far as the alcoholism. And he traveled a lot, so she was alone a lot. And so I think she drank more. It went from
Doesn't make for a good combination to be
it
alone
doesn't.
and, yeah,
No.
and an alcoholic
And isolated.
and isolate. Yeah.
and he had to go to Calais and work Monday through Friday. And it changed from wine. Not that I'm saying it makes any difference, but when you're 90 pounds and you eat a couple slices of cheese, to Maker's Mark whiskey.
Oh boy.
And then, Sheldon, God love him, he's an old hippie. And what's cute is that he had known my mother since high school.
I did not know that.
Yeah. He actually, he said he babysat me once with a friend of my mom's, that she and my father were going somewhere, and they had a mutual friend, Lois, and my mom dropped me off with Lois, and he happened to be there.
Isn't that funny?
Isn't that funny? But
It's
he
a
said,
small and it's a small world, and
so,
even
and that's in
especially in
Hampton.
Maine.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
in Hampton.
especially in Maine.
Yeah. But anyway, so he knew my father. Yeah. So he had loved my mother forever. But so he was working, so he'd come home, and he was this old hippie, and so he was so laid back, and he'd come home on Friday and see she was so wound up from being alone, and she wanted all this attention, and and he was just such this old hippie, and then he'd have the Maker's Mark, and it became a toxic situation. So yeah, they decided that he would move her closer to. So they sold the big house, and they got a condo closer to Calais, so she wouldn't be alone so much. And when they got that condo, she was still alone, but only like 3 days a week. And this is where, I know I'm going on, but this is where I think, so that must have been, let's say, 5 or 7 years. Let's say 2008. I can remember her coming to my house, and we sat outside. She said she had to tell me something, and we sat outside. And I still talk to her every day. And in fact, that's another thing that I struggle with to this day, is that every day she'd call me at least twice a day.
I
Hi,
remember you.
honey.
I remember you telling me about that, and just
Hi, honey. And at that point, again, I had gone through my divorce. I had an infant. I had a handful of a toddler. I had a third grader, and I had my own issues going on at the time. And these relentless phone calls of nothingness. Um, I didn't want to talk about chit chat. I didn't have. I could barely keep it together. Oh, and you're doing you're the strongest person I know. It just unnerved me. Those, because I wasn't, and I was barely holding on, and it just felt so fake. And it was at least 3 times a day. And I would friggin' silence those calls, because she was bored. She was
Mm-hmm.
alone. She had no one to talk to. And what I wouldn't give now, to. But anyway, so she came over, and I was like, what's the big thing now, Mom? And she's like, I have to tell you about a situation that's going on with the neighbors next door. Now, they had just moved into this beautiful new condo. They were just built. She said, they're stalking me. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, she's a teacher, and her husband is a truck driver. And I can hear them through the walls. They're talking about me, and they're threatening me.
Oh boy.
And I said, what? And the story, Sheila, and the details were so elaborate. I mean, so elaborate. Everything from this woman was having an affair. When the truck driver went away, she was having men over. One time she called the cops on them, and the cop found nothing. This was always when Sheldon wasn't home. She could hear them calling her names. She got a video. She said they were recording her. And I absolutely believed it, because at that point, I mean, she was sober when she was telling me this. And every
Right.
day it was a new thing. She had to call and tell me what she called her, the crazy woman. Let me tell you what the crazy woman did today. And Sheldon and I weren't incredibly close at that time, because she had just really gotten married to him. And again, I thought, here's another husband. Yeah, husband number 3. Like, I hadn't really seen him for anything more than another money train, to be honest, at that point.
Right.
The first time I met him, he pulled up to my driveway with my mother on the back of his purple Harley. And she said, "This is Sheldon." My mother on a purple Harley Davidson. She could barely even get off. And then he gets off and he's about 5'3". And she's like, "Do you like it?" And I was like, "What are you doing, you crazy woman?" Like, you'd have to know my mother. But and I'm like, "Who's this guy?" Because my mom had an active time there at the Sea Dog and she was dating and now we got a third one. So Sheldon and I hadn't really. Sheldon will say, "You didn't like me very much when I first met you," because I'm like, "Yeah, number three, here we go. She's your problem." So it's not
Yep.
like I felt comfortable calling Sheldon and saying, but I would say to my mother, "What is Sheldon saying about what is happening?" "Well, he doesn't. He says, Sheldon. He just says, leave it alone. We don't want to cause problems." And I'm like, "Mom, in my mind, I could not wrap my head around this. But the story, Sheila, was so elaborate. You would not think that that was fake."
And did Sheldon ever like or like
I
add
think
anything to that?
no.
Or do you think it was just all in her head?
I think there was a time it was all in her head. Oh no,
Okay.
it was completely false. It was completely false. Um,
Did you ever meet these neighbors?
no,
Oh,
no,
okay.
that they had to end up leaving. They had to move out
Oh boy.
because of the disturbances that she was creating by calling cops on these people that were stalking her. My uncle Bruce, uh, Sheldon incorporated him to go stay with my mom when he was out of town, supposedly to help her with the dog. He would tell me that it's not happening. And I would say, "Well, what do you mean it's not happening?" He's like, she's drinking all the time, Alicia. So I'm just in the middle going, what in the hell is going on down there? In Belfast or wherever it was that they were living at the time. Well, they ended up moving and leaving and getting a little house over by 14th Street Park. Where Fairmount Hardware used to be? There's
Yep.
a little side street back behind there that they got a cute little house that they had to rent now. Now they've lost everything, pretty much, because they lost money on they had to get out of the Stockton Spring house so quickly because
Oh, so did they lose money on that?
yes,
Oh, okay.
they were upset. Yes. And then the condo. And because of this, part of his job where he was at was contingent upon him, like, you know, staying where he was at doing
Right.
this job, but he couldn't be away from her anymore.
Wow.
So at this point, he was kind of forced into an early retirement. So
So,
they rented. Now they're renting this little. I mean, she made it cute,
yeah.
but she's back now into a little rundown house over by the park. And she came and stayed with me. If you want to hear the whole person in my attic story, and this is when
Yes, I do. I do want.
this is
Yes.
kind of when I really had a come to Jesus moment. And also too, I just want to interject and say that barbecues, family gatherings. I know that every Christmas Eve, I always, only child, every Christmas Eve was spent with my mom, Sheldon, Poppy, his wife Gail, Uncle Bruce, my cousin Amy. We always did Christmas Eve at my house because of my kids, and that's when we did gifts with the kids and dinner, and then I did Christmas at my dad's. Those had become increasingly something that ever since I moved back home, that's what we did. That I dreaded them. um Mom almost came over, I think, and then we always started early, 3 o'clock, but by 3:30 or 4 she was typically started to get that kind of meanness to her. um and I remember the last one I remember vividly is she accused my 12-year-old Chloe at the time of stealing her cell phone because she couldn't find it. So much did she accuse her, and in a mean way too. And she idolized her grandkids, but she couldn't find it. Couldn't find it when she left. Couldn't find it. I searched your purse, Mom. I don't know what to tell you. We searched pocket. I don't have your phone. Nobody has your phone. But her and Chloe had the same phone, different color cases, but like they both had whatever the phone was that U.S. Cellular was giving out at the time. And
Yeah.
she even called me when she got home to that little house and was like, Alicia, I don't know what to tell you, but I know Chloe had like continually, and I like hung up on her. Now this is Christmas Eve, and I'm hanging up on my mother for being so just mean about a
What
cell
was it?
phone.
But that must have been the dementia too, because
Yes,
or maybe the drinking.
absolutely.
But like, if Chloe had her own phone, why would she take your mother's phone?
Thank you. Right.
I mean,
And
that's logical
but in my
thinking,
mind, I'm thinking you're
right?
just drunk and you're just ruining it for, and it just she made it. If me and my cousin and Uncle Bruce, the smoking room, we'd go down, halfway through presents or whatever, and go down to the garage and have a cigarette or talk or whatever. She'd come down and she'd say, "Are you all talking about me?" Just real nasty, and we'd be like, "No, mom, we're not." Like she just turned, and in my mind, we always thought, "Yeah." And I'd say to Sheldon, "Have you guys been drinking all day? Really? Because it's 4 o'clock." And he was always like, "No, no, I don't think so." Yeah, he's always so jovial, and I'm like, "Well, God, thanks for bringing her over here like this." And I was always kind
Yeah,
of mad at him, like, "Thanks a lot." She was never
yeah.
nasty to the little ones, but so fast forward, that's how holidays started being and gathering. So I distanced myself. I didn't go spend, time with my mom really. I got those phone calls daily that just checking in. And so I had to have knee surgery, and I had to have somebody drive me to the hospital that next morning at like 5. And supposedly I wasn't supposed to be able to walk upstairs, and I was going to need help the next day. So I asked my mother to come to the house. And, often too, I would help ask her to come on like Halloween to hand out candy
Mm-hmm.
so I could take my kids trick or treat. So, I mean, I did do things like that. And so she got to my house before I did that day, um, because I'd work and pick up all 3 kids. And her bedroom was on the 3rd floor, right near the attic. And I guess she had gone upstairs and unpacked. And I came in, whirlwind. Kids are hungry. I've got backpacks. I'm unloading and da da da. It's hectic, crazy. Everybody's hungry. One's crying. Dog's got to go out. And she hauls me upstairs and real quiet. And she says, "I need to talk to you in private. Just as serious, Sheila." And it's in the middle of the winter. It's dark outside. And I'm like, "What?" I barely put down back, diaper bags. And she says, "There's someone in the attic." And I said, "What?" She said, "I saw him." And I said, "There's someone in my attic?" She said, "Yes. It's a man." And I said, I mean, she was so serious, I couldn't even laugh, like,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And I said, and then I'm like scared. And I'm like, "Did you call 9? What do you mean you saw someone?" She's like, "Well, I heard a noise. I heard talking. So I went up there and I saw him." And I said, "And then what did you do?" She's like, I came down and I closed the door. And waited for you." I said, "You didn't think to call 911? I mean, I'm coming home with small children." She was like, "Alicia, don't get mad at me. I didn't know what to do." And I said, "What do you expect me to do with this information?" And that I can remember vividly saying, What do you want me to do with this information you're telling me right now? I'm your daughter. I'm a girl. I've got little kids. And you're telling me," I said, "I'm going to call the cops." "No, no, don't." And I said, "Then what are you wanting me to do?
Right.
Like, what sane person?" I said, "Well, come show me where he's at." I mean, so I took like my son's hockey stick, and I went up there. And of course, my attic you could barely see anything anyway. That's where I put everything. Everything was in that
Yeah.
attic. She's like, he's right over there. And the only light in this great big tall, it was like you know, it's not
Yeah.
like you could see anyway. And so part of me was like, "Well, what the fuck? I didn't lock my doors." Maybe so, but there was no one in my fucking attic. I know that there wasn't. I mean, but
Right.
it's the fact that she was so convinced enough to worry me. Like, worry me. What if I had called, like, to even put my kids through that, right? And traumatize my young children. And so
I wonder if you had if you had called the cops or your mom had called the cops, like what they would have come in and been like. I wonder if they would have taken you aside and said, "Ma'am, maybe you need your mother evaluated." I don't know. I mean,
I don't.
that would have
I
been
don't.
interesting. That would have been interesting.
I think that she would have thought, well, he was there. I really think because there was, and as I have learned, as I learned through this, once we realized, there is no convincing somebody with this disease. You don't convince. You don't tell them they're wrong. You don't say, no, mom, that's not, because I did that until I learned and educated myself.
Yeah.
There, you don't. You just play along. But that is where that struggle and that fight for me trying to shake the
The
smarts
reason,
into
yeah,
her
right. That
for
makes
so
sense.
long that maybe had Sheldon said, we've been seeing a neurologist for a while, or, maybe I would not have fought and battled with her as much as I did. Um,
Well,
and I
knowledge is
did.
power. Knowledge is power.
Well,
And if you
right,
had that knowledge that your mother was
right,
having issues, you would have handled
correct.
it a whole different
Uh-huh.
way.
Right. Maybe I wouldn't have been so angry and resentful and assumed that, and my mom too, I got to tell you, she wasn't a zombie by any means, and she wasn't drugged, but she had every ailment that you can imagine. It was always something. And again, I attributed that to she's a bored, stay at home, non-working, if it wasn't the fibromyalgia, it was uh whatever you get in your hands
Arthritis.
when they turn white.
Oh,
No,
Reynolds.
uh yeah, Raynaud's or something, whatever that's called,
Yeah,
Raynaud's
right.
disease.
Yeah, I
She
have
had
that.
she had a tens machine that she had to lay on for this, the back, the hip, the this, the that, the I mean, medicine for this, medicine for that, the menopause, I mean, it was always an ailment too.
Hmm.
But I never knew what she took. I never saw her pop pills, but I can only imagine until I checked her in to Acadian. I had to check my mother in.
I'm gonna.
And that's when I found out all the medications. And I said, you
Okay.
stop them all. Stop them all. How do you even know what hurts her and what doesn't? She can't even tell you what day it is. Take her off all of it. But that's so at the time that she's, telling me all these stories, and I'm like, well, maybe these are side effects of, I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Who knows?
Yeah.
So I want to pause there,
Yeah.
and we're gonna pick this back up.
Good.
We're gonna do a two-parter.
Okay.
So we're gonna stop for today, or stop
Okay.
for now, not for today, but for now,
Yeah.
and we're gonna pick this back up, and we'll
Great.
be back soon. So
Looking
thank you
forward
for
to it.
joining. What's that?
Look, thank you for having me.
Well,
Looking
thank
forward
you
to
for
it.
being on, and thank you for everyone watching and joining us. And
Right.
stay tuned for part two.
Bye.